Welcome everybody to episode 7 of our Think Like an Explorer video blog. And this is going to be one of the episodes in this year's kind of special theme around expeditions. Both Nigel and I will be going off on expedition this spring. I'm heading to Mount Logan, second highest mountain in North America. Nigel's putting together a trip to do a ski race in Greenland. That's right, isn't it, Nigel?
It is.
And we're going to be sharing some of our planning, our secrets, our frustrations, the reality of what it takes to get these kind of projects off the ground. Our previous session was a bit of a talk about equipment. If you've missed that, you can find it on Blab or on our YouTube channels. Today, we're going to talk about one of the most frustrating, most difficult to understand matters. How do you pay for it? So you watch on people's social media feeds as they swan off to these remote locations, taking weeks out of their lives to go to places really far away with a whole lot of specialized equipment. I think everyone's got to be thinking, trust fund, sugar daddy, what's going on here? How do you pay for it? So today we're going to tell you how we pay for it, how it's difficult, how it's utterly possible, and a couple of tips about how it actually happens. So Nigel, how are you paying for it?
Well, Cathy, I certainly don't have a trust fund or a sugar daddy, I assure you of that. I've spent over 30 years in electrical engineering, working in the utility industry. And basically, most of my expedition budget comes out of me physically working. I earn a good wage, I've worked very hard, got a good education out of it, and I then invest that back into Nigel time, which to me is my expedition work, my travel, and all my adventures. I've had a little bit of sponsorship in the past and funding, but I'm going back into the 90s when I did Operation Rally. Some people give you 30 or 40 pounds here and there. But the rest, myself, Cathy, I've got through work. What about yourself?
Well, I think that's a key point. The vast majority of adventures, people are paying for themselves. It's the same with my trip to Mount Logan. Now, we do have a little bit of additional funding, which I'll talk about in a minute. But most of us, we work, we save, we spend. Yeah. And I think there are two things that people overlook. Most adventures aren't nearly as expensive as you'd expect. People look at the price of a commercial expedition up Everest, $50,000 US, $70,000 US, and assume that that's somehow a going market rate. It's not at all. That's about commercial. You're hiring a guide to take you on your adventure. That's also about an exceptional challenge, which is Everest, with its high permit fees, oxygen, Sherpas, all these kind of extra issues. The vast majority of really interesting adventures, cutting edge, new ascents, unclimbed mountains, or just really interesting personal challenges can actually be done for a couple of £1,000. Yeah. And while that may sound like quite a lot if you don't have anything in the bank, most adventurers are being pretty frugal about other stuff. There aren't any fancy holidays to the Bahamas. There isn't a great deal of money being spent in the pub every weekend. There's a good deal of scrimping and saving. Yeah. And then we're doing all our own planning. Again, we're not paying guides to organize for this. I think, again, people get prices by looking at the prices in commercial catalogs. You're paying a great deal for someone else to have done the planning and then take the risk and essentially just tell you, do this, do that, off we go. We're looking at doing them ourselves, paying for them ourselves. But there are some other things you can do. So, Nigel, have you ever made any use of grants with your expeditions?
Personally, no, Cathy. I know one or two people have. Climbing with a friend of mine 2 or 3 years ago in Russia who'd got a grant with the British Mountaineering Council. and he got through that, and that was great for him. And I've looked into quite a few. In fact, I was only at a meeting the other day, and I was handed my Mount Everest Foundation paperwork report, and there's an entire list of grants that people have received over the last year or two, 30 or 40 grants for trips. But as you say, these are small trips, a couple of £3,000, and quite rightly, these are pushing edge trips. When you're looking at grants, in my experience and what I've learned with folk, they tend to want something different, something interesting, not just an AN or the trip. I don't know. Have you looked into them yourself at all? Have you seen what they offer you at all, Cathy?
Yes, my experience is that they're a lot more than you'd expect. And a bit like all sorts of scholarships and bursaries, not all that many people are necessarily applying. Mm. So, for example, the Mount Logan trip, we have managed to get a couple of grants.
Okay.
And we're not just talking, the Mount Everest Foundation. There are a lot, right now I'm talking UK because that's what I know about, but each country, it's worth investigating. There are a lot of clubs that offer grants. The Alpine Club offers grants, the Eagle Ski Club, the Alpine Ski Club. So once you're a member and you're doing an expedition and it's got something interesting going for it, you'd be surprised what you can find. Mm. So in our case, we've got a handful of grants. That money will go into some of the specialized equipment that we need. So we're still paying our personal costs ourselves, but it's helped to take the edge off some of the extra expenses that start to run up.
Yeah. And
the internet has made this so much easier. I did a quick trawl before this talk and just start Googling adventure grants. Mm. The RGS has a brilliant list of all sorts of grants. And a lot of them sound really specialized, but okay, unclimbed mountains. A friend of mine, he's at university with a Cambridge climbing club. Off they went. There are hundreds of unclimbed mountains to be found on the border between Europe and Asia.
Yeah.
They didn't do anything desperately dangerous or difficult, but it met the criteria for being adventurous and groundbreaking.
Yeah.
And they got grants because they asked. I actually think a lot of us, I know a lot of the grants are for youngsters and, you and I aren't quite in the youngster category anymore.
Thank you, Cathy.
Yeah, well, let's face facts here. But getting youngsters on your trip is always a possibility. We've got a wonderful mix of ages on the Mount Logan trip. Iona's in her early 20s. I think, Phil's in his mid-50s. Yeah. I love adventure for the way it crosses generations.
Yes.
But also there's a lot of stuff out there that we don't ask. Yeah. Because we assume that it must be going to, I don't know, Ranulph Fiennes or Chris Bonington or Leo Holding or somebody with a big name who must be qualified with a capital Q. And the truth is, if you're out there and doing stuff, there are things to be found.
I think if you talk to Ran, I know him a little bit, one of his opening things when he lectures is this is paying the gas bill. Because his lecturing is part of other things such as his publishing that brings in funding for then getting some of the expeditions off the ground. I mean, yes, he's got a big name and yes, he goes for big sponsorship as well. But something to not be aware of, I think, with grants and such other things. But please do remember, if you're going for a grant and you get one, that's lovely. But they will set certain criteria like, please, we will require an expedition report of you, or we would like some feedback. Please do it. Please, really, please do it, because these people hand out this funding in good faith, and they do want reports back. They do expect them, certainly some of them by timescales. It's not that they're being funny, but they've got grant holders that want to know where the money's going, what's happening. And I've worked with some companies in the past that have supported other climbers, and some big names as well, actually, Cathy, who have taken equipment off them in good faith. In fact, some of them never handed it back, never gave them a report, never said thank you. And some of these companies and funding bodies have just said, thank you very much, that's the last time we'll work with you. And I think that's really vital, that if you are accepting funding or kit or a gift or whatever it is, please thank these people, please send them information, please back up what you've done. You may be there again.
I think that's a very important point. And it's actually, it's a reason why there's a lot to be said for paying for your trip yourself. The minute you take money off somebody else, you have now got a set of commitments, of obligations. It's an exchange. And even the funding bodies are exchanging in return for reports, photographs, whatever it is. You have to take that on board.
Yeah.
And I think that's a thing people may miss about the big sponsorship. My impression is a lot of non-adventurers assume that all these things are sponsored. Now, I've been sponsored on various expeditions in various ways. And my experience of it, I mean, it made things possible that weren't possible otherwise. But it's difficult and frustrating in ways that a lot of people, I think, kind of fail to appreciate. There's the time spent trying to get that sponsorship money. You know, there's just person after person after person just going, no, no, no. And frankly, the ones who go no are being helpful. At least you know where you stand.
Yes. Very good point.
The people who like you, they want your trip to happen. But they're not actually going to write a check. So that they don't tell you that. They'll say, we'll try, we'll see what we can do. It sounds really interesting. Let me get back to you. What they're actually saying is, good luck, but no.
Yeah.
And you can waste so much time chasing those sort of possibilities.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then even if you finally got some kind of real possibility, there's the question of what it's going to cost you to do this. You are exchanging media coverage. There's almost no other real kind of exchange going on. Possibly you're doing some kind of testing on equipment or something, but it's not all that likely. You're exchanging media coverage. You've got to organize this. It's unlikely to be the company. It's unlikely to be the journalist. You're the one who's going to have to run all the expedition PR. And you've just added to your costs. You probably now need video cameras. You may need permission to report from a country. You can't take a satellite telephone into India, for example.
Absolutely.
If you take that into account when you promised all sorts of reports back from the field. There's a whole lot of extra problems you've set yourself up for, or any kind of reporting, satellite phones, video, whatever. It needs power in the field. Now, suddenly you're needing to take out solar panels and try to recharge batteries and try to not just climb your mountain, but shoot video at the same time. Get this back to people. And halfway up the Mazeno Ridge, just trying to compose a damn text message on an old-fashioned satellite phone to send out on Twitter to just get a satellite connection. That was about 20 minutes of my life where I really, really wanted to be doing something else practical about the expedition. And then half the time it wouldn't go through. Managing sponsors is expensive and frustrating and time-consuming.
I mean, you talk about testing, Cathy. I have done quite a bit of testing for companies, and I accept the gear in good faith, and I always write them reports. I always send them photographs, and it might be, right, we'd like you to appear in one of our promotional videos on our website, so you've got to go and do that. Fortunately, I tend to only pick companies that are very geographically close to me because I haven't got the time to be driving up and down Britain, nipping here or there. But it has worked well for me in kit, just receiving gear. And obviously with my hands and feet, having the stuff made to fit is rather useful. But they do want reviews. But as you say, we were only talking about this with your Logan trip last time. You start taking laptops and solar chargers and telephones, and then the weight goes up and the expectation goes up. And reading some of the expedition reports, as I have recently, there's actually more failures than people think, where things do go wrong. But as long as you're honest that we tried it, we did this, the weather was a nightmare, we couldn't get up, people don't mind. But they need that feedback. They need it back. But, you know, do you want to be a walking technological shop? Well, that's your choice.
And yes, there are a set of problems, one of which is if you lose your communications in the field. And I've had a base camp destroyed in a storm. And then you're sitting there going like, well, what do? Do we go back to climbing because we are actually fine? Or do we sit here and try and reconnect all our communications because we've made these promises? We've got stories that we have to get out. Then, of course, there's always the problem that you may fail. This is a hard sell to sponsors. Yeah. They want it to be difficult, dangerous, really challenging. They also want guaranteed success and guaranteed that there will be no sort of dramatic failure. And you can't have both things. The whole point about it being a challenging, exciting, difficult story is that failure is a possibility, disaster is a possibility.
Well, I mean, I was looking this morning, we're talking about expeditions, you know, the actual definition of an expedition, because you say, Cathy, people expect things back, they expect success, they expect it to all go swimmingly. And if we've looked on social networking, and there's an awful lot of people smiling when they're really crying, in my view, out there, saying how wonderful all these things are. But an expedition, the definition is an excursion, journey or voyage made for some specific purpose as war or exploration. Now, let's not do the war bit, but exploration does not come with guarantees. Going anywhere, even in Britain at the moment with the weather we're having, is not guaranteed. We cannot put a cast iron, we will come back and we will have discovered the missing link, found some remote city, climbed some mountain, because we know, well, the world just isn't like that.
Indeed. And I mean, I've done the one where you promise, well, you know, even if we fail, the reasons will be interesting. But the truth is sometimes they aren't. Sometimes there was a landslide and the road was closed and you couldn't get to base camp, you know, and that's that. It's over.
There was a report I was looking at only recently. All the kit got lost in transit. So they turned up at some remote place in the middle of the world with no gear. That was it. End of trip. You can do some trekking, you can meet people, you can do things, but you certainly ain't doing any climbing without any gear. But it happens. How many of us have lost gear or lost a bag flying? I mean, it's just part of life. It
happens, and you do need to think through what you're going to have done with a sponsor in that kind of setup. Mm-hmm. Just one thought about gear sponsorship, which is often the easiest to get, and it can make you feel really satisfied when those boxes start to arrive in the post, and you think, yeah, but it is worth just running the numbers. Mm-hmm. When your box turns out to be, you know, 20 boxes worth of chocolate bars, and you're like, I spent, you know, 25 hours on the telephone to try and get that bit of sponsorship. I could have bought those in the supermarket for whatever, 100 quid. I earn 100 quid in, you know, whatever it is in terms of your real job. Sometimes, particularly little bits of gear sponsorship are not worth the time you spent on them. Yeah. You're better off, you know, working a shift in a second job or something to get that money quickly and efficiently. And then you've got no ongoing commitments once you get back to spend time with stories and photographs. And it depends what you want. But I think you have to be really quite ruthless about the finances of small bits of sponsorship.
Yeah. I mean, it's a very good point, Cathy. With me being in professional engineering and in speaking like yourself, we probably have got the time, but as you say, it's all about efficiency. Do we choose to spend all those hours for not much, when, as you say, we can do an extra speech, work an extra shift, the money's there, we are, you know, we're not reporting back to anyone, we know exactly where the funding's come from. And I think also as well, I know it's a slightly different subject, Cathy, but when you're looking at sponsorship and you're looking at funding, you're also looking at what do you want out of this trip? If you want massive media exposure and you want lots and lots of faces all over the newspapers and plastered all over the web, well, sponsorship could be good because they'll like that. If you just want to go and do something really interesting for you and a few friends, now that's something very different. And it might be that you choose to pay for it yourselves because it's your adventure. You're not interested in telling the world left, right and centre. You might post some pictures, write a blog. But then you know where the money's come from and you can come back home and have a great time afterwards and look at the next trip knowing that I haven't got to worry about that. I paid for it. I'm happy. Everybody knows the outcomes. Next trip, please.
I think that's a very valid point. And that means that if it's a failure, you just come back and say, well, that was interesting, not what we expected, but, hey, we came home. If it's a success, then you can, talk to media, write the book, give a speech, whatever it is afterwards.
Yeah. I was, go on, Cathy.
I'm going to say it's an interesting segue into what is a new form of fundraising for expeditions. So let's put to bed quickly an old form, which you'll read about in the books. The old days when you went to a publisher, you sold the book of your expedition, you got a big advance, and you spent that advance doing the project. Yeah. That does not happen anymore. Don't even.
Those days are long gone.
Long gone. But there is something new, which is crowdfunding for expeditions. Now, I've never done this. I don't think you have either. But I'll tweet out a couple of links afterwards. I can't get the comments to run at the same time as my video right now. But if you have a look at my Twitter, I'll put out links to the various things we've been talking about. Crowdfunding. Most people are crowdfunding media around the project. They're crowdfunding a video of the expedition or something like that. But of course, effectively, the money's all actually going into the same pot.
Yeah.
And this can work. It's an interesting way to get a lot of people to give small amounts, and that will add up into a big enough figure to make the project work, particularly if it's not a very expensive project. But of course, like all crowdfunding, there are also some fairly spectacular failures where the money supposedly for the video gets spent on just trying to get the expedition off the ground. The expedition then fails and the person just kind of quietly goes home and the funders are left with nothing. They didn't get a project, they didn't get a video. All the problems with failed Kickstarter projects apply to failed crowdfunded expedition projects. I have got some interesting links both to failures in this regard. Oh yeah, that's just the cat coming through. That happens. And some tips as to how to do it if you want to give this a try.
Yeah.
So interesting possible avenue, but again a question, it's going to take a lot of your time to run a crowdfunding campaign well. Is that really the best way to try and raise that money, or would you be better just, getting a couple of weeks worth of a bartending job or something and putting that money aside for the expedition?
I've actually got a little bit of knowledge with crowdfunding, Cathy, though I've never done it myself. I've got a couple of friends who work in, say, speaking or lecturing, coaching, and they wanted to write a new book, and they've got crowdfunding support to write the book. But on the back of it, what it will be is perhaps for every person that gives me more than 40 or 50 pounds, I'll give you a free copy of my book. So they've got some payback. One thing with crowdfunding I have heard, but I think there's a way around this now, is if you set a target and you don't reach it, it can be difficult to get the money. So you might say, right, we need £10,000, and if you only raise 8, it doesn't actually work out. Though I've heard from other people there's a way around that now. But
there are two possibilities. There are different crowdfunding platforms.
Yeah.
Some will allow you to keep all the money that was promised. Some will only allow you to take the money if you reach your target.
Yeah.
But of course, the advice is if you're £2,000 short, put your own £2,000 in the target.
Yeah.
So you get access to the other 8,000.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that people don't allow for is how expensive it can be to fulfill whatever you promised to the crowdfunders. And a very good question coming in from Leanne. And the answer is, it depends.
The question is what sort of pounds are needed, or what?
Incredibly frustrating sort of answer. It depends what you're doing. It depends where you're going. It depends who you're going with, and it depends what you've promised to the world and to sponsors.
Yeah.
So there's a British explorer who runs a thing called, or promotes a thing called micro challenges, which are little expeditions that cost less than £100.
Yeah.
And his challenge to his followers is get out there and just, don't sit there going like, well, I could go to Everest too if someone would give me $100,000. Work out what you can do for under £100.
Yeah.
A lot of these unclimbed mountain expeditions onto the Europe-Asian border, a couple of £1,000s.
Yeah.
Our Mount Logan trip will come in, I don't know, I haven't finished buying the kit yet, but it'll come in at around £2,000, £2,500.
Wow.
Pretty good.
I always thought it's
the Nanga Parbat expedition I did. Now we're in a different category. So this is now a Himalayan 8,000 meter peak with all the admin that goes around that. That cost about $75,000 US,
Okay.
plus a $10,000 refundable deposit for helicopter rescue.
Yeah.
So obviously we got that back, but that's a cash flow problem.
Yes.
Whether you've got $10,000 to hand over. In that case, we took the 75,000, we divided it 3 ways because there were kind of 3 of us involved in planning. It's like, you raise it how you want it. One guy had a big deal corporate job. He could write a check.
Yeah.
I raised sponsorship. I think Sandy took money against his future earnings.
Yeah.
Different ways for different people.
Yeah.
But then you get the kind of the Everest style. But again, Everest can cost you anything from, these are very thumbsuck figures, but say about $30,000. If you do it yourself, go to the north side, don't take oxygen, don't employ Sherpas, through to, you're buying a place in a commercial team. I think the prices for 2016 are in the potentially the $70,000, $80,000 realm. Hey, if you're making the IMAX movie on Everest, I think their budget was something like $5 million, but clearly they had a movie to make. So, movable feast, but don't assume that it's ultra expensive.
No, I mean, I think McKinley, we put it together for just under $3,000 each, I think, at the time. As you say, booking your own flights, doing your own guiding, sorting your own kit. And you can do, again, it depends what you want from an adventure or an expedition. You can fly into Europe on a budget airline. You can get there for £30 or £40. You can. It's only when you want to go somewhere remote. I mean, a flight into Greenland's not cheap, I assure you, and there are very few options. Particular helicopter flights to certain areas in the world are not cheap, and there aren't many options. But that doesn't mean you have to fly there business class. How many of us who travel the world end up going on buses here, there, and everywhere, rattling away, and we'll do it for a few dollars. And because it's the trip that's the important thing, it's the experience and the adventure, not the 5-star hotels and the fact that, look at me, we are actually doing this because we love it, and we're doing it because it's what makes us get out of bed in the morning. And that means that we, as you say, Cathy, will put things to a side. We're not down the pub every Friday night. We're not buying sports cars. This is our being, as it were. And both of us have rattled along on nasty little bus rides through the middle of nowhere, trek for miles to get to the base of near to something that to us is the closest thing to heaven. And we'll do it fairly and cheaply. I can't see the point in, unless it's necessary, spending hundreds of thousands of pounds to benefit somebody else's pocket when I can actually do it myself.
Indeed. I think that's a great place to wrap up. It's about what you want out of it.
Yeah.
And if it's genuinely adventurous to the remote, forgotten, hard to find corners of the world, it will be time consuming to organize, but cheaper than you expect.
Yeah.
What people need is to make the effort to work out how to do it. And there are a lot of resources. The internet is amazing. There are also some more formalized things. In the UK, the Royal Geographical Society, every year they run a weekend-long seminar on how to organize expeditions. I'll tweet some links afterwards. That's a great place to start. And the clubs are really helpful. The likes of the Alpine Club, the Eagle Ski Club, whatever your area is, through them, there are both knowledge and grants available. I think what we need to do is step away from the general media. The pricing is not what you hear about Everest, and adventures are not, frankly, the 7 summits. 7 summits is a well-trodden path these days. Join the queue.
Yeah.
Adventures are the things where you need to dig around, find out what hasn't been done yet, work out how to get to that remote location. Adventures are not necessarily Antarctica, which is exceedingly expensive because of the air flight. It's those borderlands on the edge of Asia, all the Stan countries. There's all sorts of things to do there. But you've got to do the work, work out how to get there.
Yeah.
So don't look to the general media for your understanding of how this works. Get on the internet, ask questions. There are so many resources available now. That with the adventure comes the work to work out where to go and how to make it happen. It's not really about money. It's about putting in the time. So thank you to everyone who's joined us. We'll be back again in 2 weeks' time. Oh, let me take that last question from Leanne. Do you live? No. I guess maybe you had that $5 million budget. But just think about that. You can't live stream. You're lucky if you can get your satellite telephone to connect to a damn satellite long enough to send out a text message, which will, you've linked to your Twitter account. Again, maybe on a Red Bull multi-million-dollar budget. And maybe the sponsor, the guy who jumped from the edge of the stratosphere. Obviously that was being live streamed. But he was burning through millions of dollars as well as burning through seconds as he plunged back down to earth. That's not the kind of adventure that most of us are doing, or most of us even necessarily want to do. Again, go digging to find out how you can really do the adventurous stuff. And join us again in 2 weeks' time as we continue to dig into how you can think like an explorer and bring that back into your everyday life.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, Cathy. Thanks, Cindy.
Very cool.